So welcome to Oscar 5001, and that's demonstrating air and ground team coordination. This is something that we will be going through there's a quiz. You can go through through everything. I will check you off, but again, when you're doing your in person, you are going to have to show this as a task. Okay, so even though I'm checking you off, it's that one question that says, even though I've taken the quiz and if I don't show proficiency, I will have to get it removed. Okay, this is one of those. This is one of them. The actual in-person is going to take less than 5 minutes. I'm going to pretend that I'm a ground team with you, and you're just going to show me what you want to do here. Okay, so let's begin with Oscar 5001. And this task can be found on page 9 of the task guide. As you've probably noticed by now, many of these tasks requirements come straight out of other achievements. Now, aerial photographer, mission observer, mission scanner, etc. Someone thought it was something we needed to know, and they're right. But sometimes we have to modify the information for our purposes. This is one such time. That said, since you've been listening to me for quite a while, and quite some time tonight, I've invited another guest speaker. Brett Seidel, who is the DOU from Arizona Wing, is going to present the meat and potatoes of this task. There are parts of this video that we need to discuss further, and I'll pause it at those points, especially when it comes to those modifications that need to be done when involving an sUAS and not a manned aircraft. So without further ado, let's begin.
Welcome to Task O-5001, Demonstrate Air and Ground Team Coordination. This task is from the UAST UASMP task guide published by the Civil Air Patrol. And so to begin, what crew responsibilities strongly impact the ability to coordinate your own team and to work well with multiple? Welcome to Task O-5001, Demonstrate Air and Ground Team Coordination. This task is from the UAST UASMP task guide published by the Civil Air Patrol. And so to begin, what crew responsibilities strongly impact the ability to coordinate your own team and to work well with multiple teams? So strong execution of these 6 responsibilities will help you achieve excellent coordination with multiple ground and air elements. So radios are by far the preferred way to communicate within Civil Air Patrol, and you'll assign primary radio responsibility to your first technician, but the pilot will still have a radio. And then be sure to brush up on your radio skills or conduct refresher training if the crew is rusty or green. And the radios used inside CAP are the E.F. Johnson variety with a handheld and mission base unit pictured here. You'll learn about them in iCut training, which you definitely want to take if you haven't already. And as you can see, you'll be contacting almost everyone using these radios. But you can't use the E.F. Johnsons to monitor private or commercial general aviation, so if possible, secure an air-band radio to monitor what those planes might be saying. It's important to monitor only. Do not contact general aviation without clearing ahead of time with a comms officer who has the authority to approve you. And if you can use radios reliably to coordinate with nearby airplanes, you can save a point on your ORM matrix by choosing aircraft in areas of operation with coordination. Good for 2 points instead of 3. And just remember, higher score is more risk, lower score is less risk. Okay, and then at a minimum, you'll need a basic understanding of GPS coordinates to do this task well. Methods of doing this will vary due to different hardware software combinations. This particular method works if you have a DJI Go 4 app on your phone or iPad and a compatible drone. So try this while the drone is on the ground first, but the key is that this method does work in the air. So you'll back out of the main flight screen during flight and get here. And then you'll touch the sandwich bars near the top. Then choose Find My Drone from the menu. And so here's the exact GPS coordinates of the drone now, and these numbers will move as the drone flies around. Okay, GPS 101, the left number 39 goes up as you head north and goes down as you head south. The right number, -75, goes up towards -76 as you head left and down as you head right. So you can do two things using this method: either fly out over a target of interest and retrieve the GPS coordinates, then radio them to ground team, or you can receive GPS coordinates from ground team, manually fly out to them, and investigate. And then once you get close, slide down the coordinates menu and touch the camera icon that appears bottom right, which pops up the FPV view for situational awareness and confirmation of targets without ever even leaving this mode. Even though you've lost EVLOS, if anyone in visual control of the drone can no longer determine its heading. EVLOS is required by CAP and the FAA unless you have waivers in place, and NHQ will advise you if there are any waivers. Now, teamwork is your best bet to overcome EVLOS restrictions. Make a chain of technicians and visual observers extending out as far as you need, and then hand off visual control to each one in turn so you continuously maintain EVLOS. And I've included a mock script at the bottom for handoff of visual control. EVLOS can be broken, but there are rules to it, and so a break in EVLOS must be due to what's called operational necessity. Those are things like checking your radio and adjusting to a new channel, or looking down at telemetry data to check battery percentages. The key being you must retain the ability to quickly recover EVLOS. So practically speaking, within moments of looking back up, you've recovered EVLOS. And this guidance is taken directly from FAA Advisory Circular 107-2. Okay, a drone can overcome the field of vision issues affecting ground teams. You should anticipate and capitalize on this advantage by maintaining situational awareness and recognizing opportunities as they develop to see over something tall, or to scout an area quickly, or to check on top of that hill. Keep in mind, though, that whatever you see, be prepared to relay the information in exacting detail to the ground team. And ground teams are often navigating unfriendly terrain while loaded with gear. Comparatively speaking, an sUAS can get to any given target much faster. Now, if a ground team is relying on you to lead them in somewhere or to continue circling over an object until they arrive, demonstrate patience by waiting for them and following through on the first target before you continue checking on other targets. Your probability of detection goes up significantly each time you increase the number of eyes watching your live feed. Secondary technicians or onlookers at your field base are good targets to enlist and provide feeds to. There's 3 good ways to do this: goggles, HDMI cable, and HDMI wireless. The goggles will only work with some sUAS to produce a second feed. So this Mavic Pro pictured here is capable of producing 2 signal feeds, one to the controller and one to the goggles. Other sUAS may only be capable of putting out a single signal to the controller, meaning that you'll have to choose between either a phone, tablet, or the goggles. If you have a controller that's equipped with an HDMI out port, you can send a feed to a TV and have it watched by 1 or more people. Now keep in mind that's in addition to the feed sent from the USB port to your phone or tablet, 2 total feeds. And this is a Phantom 3 controller, which was upgraded with an aftermarket DJI HDMI model for $110. and we upgraded from this one. Notice you gain the additional HDMI port and the DJI CAN bus, which is useful for advanced data logging. And unfortunately, this Mavic style controller has no way to include an HDMI port, so you are limited to one signal from these controllers. And for the wireless HDMI method, you replace the cable with an HDMI wireless extender kit. Just plug in the broadcast dongle to your controller's HDMI port, and then hook up the base module, which is that red box on the TV, and transmit. All right, and so before you leave mission base, you'll need to get all of these details. Let's check them out. Know thine frequencies. It's mission critical. And repeaters are big antenna stations placed atop tall hills or mountains in a strategic way. They take up your broadcast signal and rebroadcast it over a wider area, dramatically increasing your overall range for transmitting radio messages. So keep in mind there may be more than one repeater for your area of operation. Simplex channels, also known as tactical channels, are what you use to talk line of sight to a person. There are usually a few of these being used, so write them down. And then cap aircraft are only monitoring a few channels at a time, so be sure to know which ones those are, and then determine the hailing procedures to contact those cap aircraft. A typical hailing procedure might look like the picture here. So step 1, communications go through the repeater first, where both parties establish contact and agree to move to a tactical channel. Then step 2, establish contact on the tactical channel and continue communications. Now, doing it this way helps reduce overall traffic through the repeaters. And you may be operating on a task force or strike team with other ES agencies, so check the comms plan for those specialty frequencies and hailing procedures. If no comms plan exists yet, try to work with a comms officer and make one. Then establish your check-in periods up front with base and any ground teams you're working with. Use manned aviation as a rough guide for missing aircraft time windows. They get 2 hours without checking in before base initiates missing aircraft procedures. Now, if ground team has been missing their check-ins with the sUAS team, that may be an indicator of lost comms. So use appropriate methods to deal with this. Then keep in mind, people familiar with the area of operations may be aware of dead zones. Be sure to factor those into your planning. Oftentimes, sorties traveling into dead zones have reduced check-in requirements. You can only really overcome dead zones by passing messages back to base through overhead cap planes or by interrupting your sortie to drive outside the dead zone and pass messages. Having the same topographical maps as ground team can be a tremendous help to team coordination. With the same maps, sUAS team has a clear understanding of overall terrain challenges, which can result in better anticipation of the needs for a drone's perspective over and beyond obstacles. Also, ground teams can make pinpoint scouting location requests that sUAS teams understand, and then the sUAS team's directions back to ground team can be very exact. Get as many details as you can about the vehicle description of ground teams expected to be in the area, and be sure to inform others about your vehicles as well. Other wings have reported using removable duct tape X's on top of vans. That would help tremendously with identification from the air. But keep in mind, decals that identify vehicles from the air is a sensitive topic for the Air Force. So you absolutely need to clear top of vehicle decals with an incident commander or next highest authority prior to installing anything. Okay, you want to know the exact uniform of ground teams you'll be operating with. This will allow you to identify teams from the air, especially if you have to pick them out from other hikers in the area or other emergency services members on scene. Rendezvous points are important to establish. These are spots where ground teams decide they'll head for or fall back to during the sortie. And rendezvous points can be especially useful to sUAS teams if they lose awareness of ground team while conducting aerial searches, or if a lost comm scenario happens. In both those cases, you'll know where to backtrack and search for ground teams at. Just be sure to make your rendezvous time windows plus or minus 15 minutes and choose easily visible landmarks or intersections of roads. You can see in the image that we've identified the fixed sUAS base of operations and 2 rendezvous points for ground team, one at an intersection of roads and one near the northwest side of an easily visible landmark, the Cave Creek Historic Dam. During a sortie, your radio communications will rarely be available 100% of the time, so have your nonverbal communications plan pinned down in advance. And there are things that both ground teams and sUAS teams can do. If a ground team finds that they're receiving radio messages but cannot broadcast messages themselves, they can use these techniques if communication is needed to proceed with the sortie. The moment they suspect comms have gone down, they can slow or stop the vehicle and look for any inbound sUAS. A drone might be inbound to their location to begin lost comm maneuvers. Then only if a drone is actively observing ground teams. If they're still receiving messages but can't send back out, they can blink their headlights to say message received. If they're no longer receiving anything and can't send out, they can turn on their flashers. Beyond this, feel free to get creative with other solutions. Maybe use colored flags that signify certain responses. Whatever you choose, just be sure to rehearse it well and distribute a reference sheet with all maneuvers described to both ground team and sUAS. Otherwise, you might not know what's going on. Okay, sUAS teams can use a variety of maneuvers when confirming messages, requesting actions, and asking teams to follow. If an sUAS team discovers they can receive radio messages but no longer send them out, they can use these techniques if communications are needed to proceed with the sortie. I've added the multi-rotor versions underneath the plane recommendations. Please pause here to read through each one.
And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So obviously we don't have wings that can go left, right, up and down and things. So we have to look at different maneuvers when we are talking to our ground teams from the air. So if we have received a message that and we cannot get it back over the radio, then to tell them that we've received it and understood it, what we would do is strafe left and right. Okay. If we have received the message but we do not understand, then what we're going to do is we're going to spin into play. We're going to spin in place by doing our yaw. We're just going to yaw. Okay. If we don't have a yet, if we need to tell them that yes or affirmative, then we're going to go back and forth with our stick just to let them know that yes, we've received the message, or yes, the answer is affirmative. Okay. If the answer is no, and this is why we spin in place when we don't understand, because if we are no, then we can do the same thing. We can literally yaw left and right, and it looks like our drone is saying no.
What is spinning in place again? Is it flying in circles or
No.
spinning in place?
Spinning in place. So spinning in place, yeah, see, a plane can't spin, so it would turn in a circle. What we would do is we would hover and then yaw right or left and have it spin a couple of times.
Okay. Spin would be message received, not understood. I don't know what you're saying. Yaw is okay, is
They're both a yaw,
shaking
because in order to spin, you have to hit the yaw stick, right?
Okay.
So what we're saying is you're going to do half stick maneuvers on the yaw and just go right left to make that no, to make it look like it's saying no. If we're spinning, we're just putting the yaw, whether we're putting it right or left, but we're doing it and it's just going to spin in place.
Okay. So I guess you should be in like a low enough altitude that people on the ground can see what you're doing.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
And if you take a
if
look
it's too high up,
descend to 100 feet.
Okay. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And if you can, descend lower, right? But absolutely correct. That's the key. You need them. There's no sense in doing that at 400 feet. As the pilot with the control station, you might know that you're spinning in place, but they may not be able to see that if it's 400 feet in the air, especially if it's the SkyDO2. It's a small enough. You know, you were saying that you fly a Mavic. Put your Mavic 400 feet in the air and see if you can see that it's spinning. Right?
Yeah, I guess the other thing to remember is if you're in communications with an air crew, this is not going to work with between UAS, sUAS and an aircraft.
Correct. Absolutely correct. We're talking about talking with your ground team. The speeds involved between an sUAS and a plane just make it absolutely, I won't say absolutely, but virtually impossible. And as a matter of fact, we're going to come on to something here that we're going to talk about in a second too.
And then the biggest thing to remember with these maneuvers is that they were taken directly from CAP's manned aviation instructional material. This means that except for the objective is here maneuver, applying these maneuvers to sUAS requires teams to coordinate on speed. Ground teams must be traveling at half or less of your drone's maximum speed, otherwise you'll never overtake them to perform these maneuvers. I'll zoom in on these one at a time. Go ahead and pause and look over their descriptions if you haven't seen them before.
Before we do that, again, he brings up something that we've discussed in past classes and amongst us as pilots. The odds of you actually flying an sUAS with a ground team in a car are going to be slim and none. Two things are coming at you. First of all, when you take a look at some of these as he puts them up one at a time, it's going to be very difficult. Remember, your sUAS has a maximum speed, depending on what it is, of anywhere between 18 and 25 miles an hour. In order for you to coordinate with a car, your car can only be traveling at 15 to 20 miles an hour. It's not going to make sense in many of these cases for a quadcopter to be doing this. Now, these maneuvers are in place for the times that we will be using that fixed wing, because that fixed wing can fly faster and acts more like an airplane.
Yeah,
So
more.
these are many of, as you said, unless you've got until you get to the objective is here, all of these other maneuvers are probably never going to be done with a quadcopter, but you want to learn them in case you ever do get to that point where you're also going to be using the fixed wings.
Yeah, more.
Besides, a quadcopter only has 400 feet either way, so 800 feet. I think the car would cover that in maybe 10 seconds or something.
All right, so we'll go through. I'm just going to go through them briefly, but again, keeping in mind that we're hardly ever going to be using these with a quadcopter.
The biggest thing to remember with these maneuvers is that they were taken directly from CAP's manned aviation instructional material. This means that except for the objective is here maneuver, applying these maneuvers to sUAS requires teams to coordinate on speed. Ground teams must be traveling at half or less of your drone's maximum speed, otherwise you'll never overtake them to perform these maneuvers. I'll zoom in on these one at a time. Go ahead and pause and look over their descriptions if you haven't seen them before. So we have daisy chain, U-turn, turn, stop or dismount, and objective is here. The two nonverbal maneuvers exclusive to multi-rotors are revving the engines and bouncing. Rev the engines while passing overhead ground teams, or bounce within view of ground teams to let them know they should follow you. And moving along, the last question in this task asks you to apply what's been learned and demonstrate coordination. Now, I've done that here with an imagined scenario and paperwork. You can see we've got sUAS and ground team member names, designations, uniforms, vehicles, and relevant vehicle decals, check-in times, maps, rendezvous points, communications frequencies, and lost comms procedures. And so in this scenario, we're looking for missing persons known to have been in the Cave Buttes recreational area recently. sUAS base is up on a hill overlooking the large valley. And then the ground team is on foot and will proceed west along Cave Creek Road. Rendezvous 1 is an intersection. Rendezvous 2 is a landmark, the northwest side of Cave Creek Historic Dam. Now, when ground team descends into the foliage, we appear to lose signal here, which is a shame because the sUAS team has just identified two potential targets here and here. So the sUAS team does a route search along Cave Creek Road, picks ground team back up, then performs the bouncing follow me maneuver and leads ground team to the targets one at a time. And just moving along, I do want to take a minute and thank the Unsplash artist who provided a ton of visual content for this presentation. A big thanks goes to everyone on this list. And that concludes the task. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you in the next one.
Now, as part of what we do, I've also included some questions in the quiz that are going to simulate some of that that imaginary mission that Brett created. Also, we're going to go through some of these things when we do our in-person reviews with everybody. Okay. So
Captain Moore?
Yes.
I will say that for the quadcopter versus van scenario, you're probably never going to use that. But last year, when I was doing ground team leader school at NISA, we did use drones with ground teams on foot quite a bit.
Yes.
To get the ground teams to follow the drones. The only downside to it is in his scenario, they did a route search, found the ground team, and took him to each of the objectives one by one. In that time, your 20-minute battery life is going to be gone. So you're not really going to be leading them to multiple locations.
Actually, ironically, I have had that discussion with Brett because he realized that too after he had already done the video.
If you had multiple drones, that would work, but other than that, no.
So again, you bring up a very valid point, and again, we are limited when we're doing these maneuvers. We're limited to our flight time. Don't keep that in mind. We are limited to the time that our battery will have from 100% down to 30%. We're going to talk about that in another session. We never let the battery go below 20, and at 30 we should be starting to wrap it up. And that gives us on the Skydio, on the Phantom series, for many of the Mavic series, that gives us anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes of flight time. Okay. So any questions about anything that you saw in the video or the modifications we discussed? All right, then. So now I want to spend some time going over and clarifying some terms that we've been throwing around for the last couple of weeks. These are important to know when coordinating with other teams. Why? Because it maintains our parameters of safety. Let's start with EVLOS.
Visual line of sight.
Sorry? Okay, so it stands for visual line of sight. We've been talking about that a lot, but what does it actually mean? Simply put, it means the pilot always has eyes on the aircraft. But that would be too easy. Luckily, the FAA is always here to help. The definition as written right in section 107 states, visual line of sight aircraft operation. 107.31, with vision that is unaided by any device other than corrective lenses, the remote pilot in command, the visual observer, if one is used, and the person manipulating the flight control of the small unmanned aircraft system must be able to see the unmanned aircraft throughout the entire flight in order to know the aircraft's position, determine the unmanned aircraft's attitude, altitude, and direction of flight, observe the airspace for other air traffic or hazards, and determine that the unmanned aircraft does not endanger the life or property of another. Paragraph B states throughout the entire flight of the unmanned aircraft, the ability described in paragraph A of this section must be exercised by either the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating the flight controls of the small unmanned aircraft system, or a visual observer. What does that mean? Let's get through the gobbledygook. In other words, someone has to have eyes on the aircraft at all times. Think obstructed line of sight. The pilot may lose sight of the sUAS when photographing or inspecting an object. A technician is then instructed by the PIC to place him or herself in a position that will allow the technician to have eyes on the aircraft. They can then relay any pertinent info regarding any hazards that might come into play. Remember I said the first night that having a 107 has some perks. This is one of them. Recreational pilots are not permitted to lose sight of the aircraft at any time. Mission pilots are, provided that they are within these limits of temporary obstruction. Any questions on EVLOS? Okay, so EVLOS, that stands for Extended Visual Line of Sight. So what do we mean by extended visual line of sight? Let's extend our picture that we just had and take a look. Fundamentally, EVLOS is an operational method where a pilot is always present on a location with one or more external observers chaining along the flight path, keeping the UAV in their line of sight. The observers communicate critical flight information through radio to assist the pilot in maintaining a safe distance from other air users, both manned and unmanned, as well as structures, terrain, and other hazards. This is discussed a little bit in the video, but I want to stress a very important caveat. As of today, April 11th, 2022, you need an FAA waiver for this type of flight. And for us, permission from NHQ. Colonel Bomer cannot give you that permission. I cannot give you that permission. It can only come from national. To my knowledge, these permissions are extremely rare. As the program grows and we become more proficient as pilots, this may be relaxed, but that's going to take some time.
Sir, so let's say the drone pilots moves the drone across and then around the corner for a building to look on the other side, right? So that's saying that would require national headquarters approval, right? Is that correct?
No, that could be an obstructed view. What we're talking about is daisy chaining so that we, and again, let's use the Mavic as a perfect example. I'm gonna pick on Captain Thompson because he owns a Mavic.
Yes, sir.
How far can you fly that puppy before it becomes so small that you can't see it?
300-400 feet, depending on the weather conditions.
Right. I fly a Phantom a little bit bigger. I can go about maybe 500 feet. That's about
Right.
it. Okay. So we're talking. So what we're saying is I cannot send a technician 400 feet away from me and have it now go 700 feet away and daisy chain it. That becomes extended visual line of sight. Does that make sense?
Okay, good. Yes, I was going to ask you. All right, if you need visuals, can we station people, all throughout the map like a grid type of thing? Then someone will be looking at the drone at any given time, right?
You can if you're talking about obstructions, and only as a 107 pilot. You can, all you have is your trust and you are a recreational pilot, you can't fly it around a building and lose sight of it. You have to have you or somebody, one of those, like it said, notice how the loss didn't say or, it says and, which means somebody has to have eyes on it.
Wouldn't you
the
have to
107 is allowed to have that obstructed view.
Wouldn't you have to have at that kind of setup or have radio going on too?
It would be a very smart idea. Okay, and this is why you want to sometimes have 2, 3, 4 people. Perfect example. How many people were at Harbor Springs for the competition, the GLR competition last year? As one of the requirements for the sUAS, they had to take pictures of the tires of a vehicle. Well, depending on where I am as a pilot, I'm going to lose sight of that sUAS for 5, 10, 15 seconds that it takes me to bring it down below the windows of say, a Cavalier or a Toyota Corolla. So I have to instruct, but I still have to maintain line of sight somehow. I'm going to instruct my technician or one of my technicians to go around the vehicle and keep an eye on it for the 5, 10 seconds that I'm down there so that I can still monitor, but they're going to let me know, hey, you know what? You're like 2 feet off the ground. You're 1 foot off the ground. Okay, I'm good. But at least they're still communicating with you. It's a temporary obstruction. You're not extending the line of sight. You're obstructed in the line of sight. And as 107 pilots, we are allowed to maneuver around an obstruction. We cannot daisy chain and extend. Is that clear? Awesome. So any other questions on EVLOS? Okay. So EVLOS stands for Beyond Visual Line of Sight and is currently not allowed. Period. Full stop. Not by CAP, not by the FAA. Again, I've extended our picture to show what I'm talking about. The sUAS at the far right is considered beyond visual line of sight as there is no one watching it. Remember what I've said it a couple, and that's why I didn't mean to jump down your throat, Captain Thompson, because you just happened to say something that this has been something we've been stressing. Remember, if it can't be seen, it can't be flown.
Can you
So
jump in on a
this is-
bicycle and then like ride over there 400 feet and then?
If you want to land it and pray that nobody takes it in the time that it takes you to get down there, as long as it's on the ground, sure, you can do that. Fly 400 feet, bicycle over, fly 400 feet, bicycle over. Sure.
Sir,
But as long as if you're beyond line of sight, you can't fly. Yes, Sergeant.
yes, sir. It's not in effect now. The FAA is just, they're just putting it out there for the public right now, but they're considering down the road, they are going to come up with, like we have part 107, they're going to come up with part 108, which definitely is about beyond visual flight, visual
Yes,
line of sight. It's
you're
not
going
in
to-
effect yet, but I think it applies to like commercial operations like UAV transports and that kind of thing.
What? Yeah.
but
what
they
they're
are-
doing. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's it, sir.
Sorry. No, I thought you were done, and I didn't mean to walk over you. Yeah. Basically, what they're trying to do is they're addressing the new FPVs,
Okay.
which is the goggles, the first-person flight, because many people are flying with these FPVs alone. So who's
Okay.
got eye? If you're watching what the camera's watching, who's got eyes on the bird?
Nobody.
Exactly. Okay. And I think that's what this this new regulation that they're trying to address. This is where I actually was confused the very first time I taught this, because as I said, I fly for Transport Canada as well, and we are allowed to daisy chain. We're not allowed under FAA. So those of you, if you ever fly in Canada, you are allowed to daisy chain. But don't get it confused. We don't. So bottom line, if you're beyond the visual line of sight, though, as I said, that mantra, if it can't be seen, it can't be flown. Does that clear up some of those acronyms that we've been flying, that we've been shooting around and seeing? Not hearing anything, I'm going to assume that's an affirmative. Awesome. Okay, so now this isn't part of the task, but they talked about it in the video about getting GPS coordinates. I just want to take a minute to discuss another method. Before I go any further, I'm not making a commercial. I'm just relaying information on a tool that I found helpful. Okay. There is a GPS app out there that can be downloaded to any tablet or smartphone called My GPS Coordinates. It's found in both the Android Play Store and Apple App Store, and it's free. A word of caution, though. This does not tell you the coordinates of the sUAS. It just tells you where you are. With the knowledge of our session that we took in how to coordinate a lat and long and a little bit of math, you can get a pretty good idea about the location of the sUAS. But again, if you need to relay to ground team, I'm standing at X spot. My drone is at, see, this is where, again, clock speak in reverse of what we were talking about. Now we're going to use ourselves as the center of the clock. My drone is at 2 o'clock from us, about 300 feet. They can then figure out, based on my GPS coordinates, where my drone is, and if they have to move to it or whatever. What I'm saying here is that you have options to know where you are. We know where you can get to the drone. This gives you options about where you are. Also, if I am correct, if my memory is correct, and I'm hoping it is, when I was flying the Sky Deal, both of them, on the ground control station, the coordinates, I don't have to do anything special. The coordinates are actually part of the telemetry that's on the screen, or is it not? Somebody that's flying the Sky Deal, confirm with that for me, if you remember. Okay, so either I dreamt that or nobody can remember seeing that as well. I'm gonna give Captain King a homework assignment here, and next time he flies the Sky Deal, double check that for me, would you, sir?
All right, I will check that for you.
Thank you. Because if I remember correctly, the GPS coordinates were on the bottom left-hand corner when I was flying.
Yes.
So you don't have to go through that little hoop that Lieutenant Seidel was talking about. If you're
that's
flying the
correct.
Sky Deal, those coordinates are right there.
That's correct.
So, any questions?
Question on my GPS coordinates, at least the concept. Is there really any way for the PIC operating the controls to move a significant distance from the starting point and do it safely?
What do you consider a significant distance?
50 or 60 feet?
If you're walking, as long as, I mean, the thing is that you're gonna, if you can always, if you're hovering the bird and someone else also has eyes on it, there's nothing there, right? You could easily walk because you're going to be able to see where you're going. If you're right, again, think back to our situational awareness. If our eyes are on the screen and we're walking, God knows if we're going to hit, a gopher hole or whatever, right? So can it be done safely? Yes. And it boils down to coordination and communication.
And also deal with that when you leave that spot, when you want return, it's going to come back to the spot where you took off from.
Exactly. If you use the return to home button, it's not going to come to you. It's not going to go back to where it started. So you may have to go back to that 60, you may have to walk those 60 feet back anyways. But again, in order to maintain eyes on the bird, people may have to move. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just remember, and we're going to talk about this when we get into, we do have a session on return to home, and Captain King is absolutely correct. Don't forget that when you hit that return to home button, that doesn't mean that it's going to where this handheld is. It's going back to where it lifted from. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, the quiz has been posted for those watching the video. I have placed it in the chat for everybody else. And that is it for tonight.